let's speak now to Tim Montgomerie, founder of Conservative Home and former Number 10 advisor. Hey, Tim, how are you doing this morning?
Very well, and happy Christmas to you.
Happy Christmas
Alex.
to you. Are we starting that from today? Is this like the run-up now? We get to say it every day. I'm
just struggling to hear you a little bit. I'm just trying to see if I turn up the volume. Yeah.
Oh, you do that. Don't you worry. We'll wait for you, Tim. You're worth it. We there?
I've got you now.
Oh, good. That's nice to know. Right, Peter Mandelson, US ambassador. It's the first time, I think, since the 1970s that it's been a political appointment to the job. Normally, of course, it goes out to the diplomatic community, the people who we don't often tend to know the names of, but they sort of raised in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and up the ranks and then become ambassadors one day. But no, Peter Mandelson, the man with more lives than a cat, he's going to be our ambassador in America. What do you make of it?
I think I disagree a little bit with you, actually, Alex, because I think if you or I were appointing, Britain's ambassador to America, it probably wouldn't be Peter Mandelson because, we live in a Brexit set of, relationships. But if Labour are going to appoint anyone, I think Peter Mandelson is about the best they could have appointed, actually. Yes, you're right, he did back Remain, but listening to him on a Times podcast recently, he was worrying about the level of regulation, for example, coming from the EU on AI. And he says, actually, it is a Brexit advantage. Peter Mandelson saying that Britain cannot regulate a new industry in the sort of suffocating way that the EU will. And he's been made positive noises about Trump. He sort of respected his mandate and said, we all need to understand why Americans voted for him again in such large numbers. So I think he'll have a political sensitivity to the British-US relationship, better than most other Labour people. He was always a Labour moderniser. And also, I think probably more of a political touch than an ambassador from, as you say, from the career diplomatic service, because Trump will know that Mandelson has, Starmer's ear in a way that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be true. So I think it's good for the country, actually, that we have him of all the people Labour could choose.
I was not expecting that from you, if I'm going to be honest, Tim, but it's nice that we have a bit of positivity. We can't always go around bashing everything that Labour does as much as I like to. But when it comes to the budget, well, I think we can justifiably bash that.
Back to form there.
Exactly. Especially given that the Bank of England says it's a load of dreck, that we're basically going to be facing stagnation at this point.
Yeah.
Because, who'd have thought putting up taxes on people employing people is going to be a bad thing? I mean, it was very predictable, wasn't it? Rachel Reeves is way out of her depth, isn't she?
Yeah, well, she is. And the economists have this expression called a doom loop. And basically, I think that's the danger that Britain could fall into this loop now. And what it basically means is that a government puts up taxes because it wants to spend it on public services or reduce the deficit. But those taxes depress growth, as you've just been saying, and we're now experiencing. And that depression then means they don't hit their targets for revenue. And what they do, rather than learning the lesson that they've made a mistake, they come back for more taxes. And then the economy softens again. And that is Rachel Reeves' big danger now. She has so burdened and already over, the tax burden was at a highest record level at the end of the Tory years. It wasn't low then. She's added to it now. And I think we're in a very dangerous position.
And quite scarily, the other day when Sir Keir Starmer himself was asked, does this mean you're not going to put up taxes again? He said, well, I can't rule it out, which pretty much means, yes, we intend to, which is frankly a disaster. The economy is on red alert. It's killing growth, according to the Bank of England. And yet, I remember in the run-up to the snap election, it was a big fight over, no, we're for growth. No, we're for growth. We're going to be all about growth. The last thing you need to do for growth is put up taxes on people who actually do the employing, the private sector, pump a load of money into the public sector. And then the other thing, of course, that Sir Keir Starmer's doing is sniffing around Europe again, wanting a better deal. And information's already leaked out from the EU side that they're going, right, OK, you better rejoin the single market. You better rejoin the customs union. Do you think that's part of the reason why they've picked Mandelson? Because he actually knows his way around EU and EU trade deals. And frankly speaking, if they want to get closer to Brussels again, we're going to end up a bit like the rope in a tug of war. war between America and the EU because Donald Trump is not pro-EU at all and would rather, I think, see the UK have a closer transatlantic relationship rather than migrate back under the regulatory orbit of the EU.
Well, I think I'm going to continue to my surprising theme of the morning, Alex, and defend Peter Malleson's point again. I think it is useful, as you say, to have someone in that role in Washington who does understand how the EU works. But I see it more as a technical advantage than, Peter Mandelson isn't being appointed as some sort of roving ambassador to the EU. It is an American appointment. He'll have his work cut out focusing on that. So I am worried that Starmer won't keep his promises not to really revisit the Brexit settlement. But I don't think this appointment in itself tells us very much about that.
As a sort of new reformer, as people might not know, Tim Montgomerie, of course, founder of Conservative Home, is now in the Reform Party. What do you make of it? There's a story kicking about yesterday, but I want to take the opportunity to ask you about it. This IPPR report, which, of course, is a sort of Blairite think tank, which turned around and went, oh, well, we better look into foreign donations to political parties. And also the idea that Starmer hasn't ruled out not having next year's local elections in May because, I don't know, they might gerrymander, they might change boundaries a bit. Do you think this is in reaction to the growth of reform, or is this just pure coincidence?
Pure coincidence. Starmer only thinks about the national interest, Alex. He wouldn't ever think of the Labour Party's interest. No, of course it's not coincidence. The fact is, it is controversial if someone who is a foreigner, although with a legitimate British company, gives, say, $20 million to a British political party. That will be controversial. I accept that. But I think the wider picture is that the main two parties in this country have big advantages because of first past the post system, the attention that the BBC gives them, the backing they traditionally have from big business and the unions. And so I think most British people know we're not dealing with a fair sort of setup. It's hard for new parties, whether it's the Greens or Reform, to break through. And in a way, I think if the money from Elon Musk comes, it's a way of almost levelling the game and making it fairer, because the opinion polls show Reform already has a lot of support. Elon Musk isn't creating a new phenomenon. He's backing it in a way. And I also think that politicians, the public, are wise enough to see when someone like Starmer is trying to change the game for his advantage. And I think Labour got a big donation from a foreign-based environmental campaigner at the last election. They didn't seem very worried when that was happening. It's only when Reform or someone else is getting an advantage that they seem to want to change the law. And if they do try and change the law, I think that will help Reform as well, because part of Reform's message is the establishment are against us, and that sort of action will only reinforce that.
It's pretty shocking. I actually find those two stories combined quite alarming. Yeah. It's the sort of activity you see by an African dictator who wants to cling on to power. Oh, we're going to mess about and cancel these elections. Oh, we're going to prevent other parties having any sort of funding. I actually think it's quite alarming.
Well, postponing or cancelling elections it really is a sign of dictatorship. It was done during the pandemic. It's the only recent example in modern British history for understandable reasons. People weren't allowed to mix then. But to do it in peacetime for no real good reason, I think all the main... And I hope there'll be Labour backbenchers. Lots of Labour backbenchers, they will have... I've spoken to a couple of them. They don't like it either. And... I was on Newsnight a couple of nights ago, Alex, with the veteran Labour MP Diane Abbott, and it was quite extraordinary. She absolutely feels Keir Starmer's wronged her, and she's a woman on a mission. And I think we are beginning to see quite a big Labour unhappiness emerge about Keir Starmer. And these moves, which you think may play well electorally for him, they don't fit with Labour's principles either, and he could be in trouble over stuff like this.
Right, you really think so? There could be a sort of revolt, a rebellion from his own benches?
On that issue a little bit. It's the cumulative sense that Keir Starmer isn't really a Labour man. Diane Abbott was saying to me privately in the lift, and then she did repeat it slightly less colourfully on air, that people forget that Keir Starmer is quite a young member of the Labour Party. He's only been in the party for a few years, and her view was that he doesn't really understand Labour's traditions, how it works, and also he's been very ruthless in chucking internal critics out of the party. We saw that at the election with deselections. And so she was saying he doesn't really have much goodwill from party. So when the going gets tough, there aren't really many Starmerites. They've backed him up until now, and not really rocked the boat because he's been winning. But if it stops winning and he doesn't have that sort of rootedness that she describes in the Labour Party, yeah, I think there could be trouble.
Now, I assume, like me, you deeply enjoyed watching Sir Keir Starmer being grilled by the liaison committee. I've never seen anything more boring in my life. When I can't go to sleep tonight, I know I'm going to put...
I'm afraid I didn't watch it, Alex, but well done you. You're a more professional journalist, clearly.
Right, I heard a bit of it, and it was just, honestly, it was boredom-inducing. It was dreadful. But during this so-called grilling, he said he has no regrets about the decisions he's made in the past 6 months and would do nothing differently. Is that sort of, the right thing to say when you're Prime Minister? Or do you think actually a little bit of perspective, considering how pretty abysmal his popularity ratings are, would do him some favours?
I think he's sort of trying to there is this mystique in Britain about Margaret Thatcher, the strong leader, the Iron Lady who never U-turned, and I think people want to be compared to that. Starmer does. The reality, of course, is that Mrs. Thatcher was more flexible on lots of things than history remembers. And the public, while they like consistency, also do actually think, well, if a policy's wrong, much better to abandon it than stick at it. And he seems to really want to stick at his guns on all things, regardless of the reality. And I think the early decision that this government took to take the winter fuel allowance away from pensioners, we're still early in this Labour government, but I think it will be defining. Right. Because it sort of reinforces all things that people have begun to associate with this Labour government, that they don't do what they say they do in the manifesto. They don't really like pensioners. They don't understand pensioners. And it's all about environmentalism. Even if it means that, pensioners are going to struggle to pay their heating bills this year, Ed Miliband seems to think that the environment's more important. I think they should have abandoned that policy. And I'm very surprised that they haven't. And I think it's bad politics. Yeah,
it seems to me it's just entirely always all about net zero. It's all about Ed Miliband's, pet project of making Britain get to net zero ahead of everybody else and ruin our economy and everything in the process. There's also not going to be any U-turn on the farmers' inheritance tax changes. Now, this is the same government who basically said, right, we've got to give the public sector huge pay rises, especially train drivers, because we can't have all of these strikes anymore. Guess what? A lot of train drivers are still going to go on strike, so that didn't work. But the farmers aren't going to give up their fight either. And if I had a choice between having food on supermarket shelves and a train running, I know which one I would pick.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing that might be next. Up until now, the farmers have protested very noisily in Westminster, but peacefully. They've shown Starmer how basically the whole farming community is united against this policy, which wasn't flagged, like the winter fuel allowance policy. And I think they hoped that he might have U-turned by now, but he hasn't. And the thing that they now have to decide is, because they're absolutely clear that this is going to break their relationship with the countryside, the beautiful countryside we have, and the quality of food in this country. So they're not going to back down. So what do? They've tried sort of to be reasonable, and they've now got to decide whether to start withdrawing their labour, which could lead to certain food shortages in our shops and supermarkets. And they obviously don't want to hurt the public, because the public's largely on their side. But if Labour don't listen, one of the features of the year that's about to start, Alex, I think might be this real food shortages problem. And that really could be very serious for the government.
Thank you ever so much, Tim Montgomerie. How are you feeling this morning, by the way? Tim was at the same party as Mike and I. We didn't actually say hello to each other there. Did you have a good time?
I had a great time. I've actually been quite well behaved this Christmas season and done quite a lot of media interviews about that defection you were talking about. So last night was my first real party night, and I actually went to 3 parties. So
Did you?
I was feeling a bit rough this morning when I knew I had to do this interview.
Yeah, I know. You and I both, but look at us, true professionals. Monty, thank you ever so much.